New faces and new places. The tempo was upbeat as the Denver Broncos had their first day of training camp in a ramp-up period before fans get the full thing on Friday at the Centura Health Training Center. We break down all the action from Wednesday's practice in Dove Valley. You're going to get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe or you hit that follow button if you have not done so already, so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, analysis, content, coverage, and more. This is the place that you should be every single day. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, Wednesday at the Centura Health Training Center was the first official day of Denver Broncos training camp. Friday's practice will be the first one that is open to fans, but media was allowed to be in attendance on Wednesday. They'll be allowed to be in attendance on Thursday as well before fans come in. And one thing stood out to me in a big way for Sean Payton, continuing to build off of what he did during OTAs and mandatory minicamp, where teaching was the emphasis. This time around at training camp, it's tempo, tempo, tempo. It's taking what you've taught and now accelerating it at a faster speed and with the goal of maximizing efficiency, getting a high volume of reps. It was a very upbeat day in Broncos country.
It sounds to me, Cody, like just Sean Payton is proving what everybody was hoping. Like, he's been there, done that. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to run a championship level franchise. And of course, we don't want to be putting the cart before the proverbial horse, right? We can't be saying the Broncos are a championship team this year just quite yet. But look, if you practice like a championship team, you've got coaches that have been there. Now you've got some players that have been there as well. You never know what could happen. And it starts obviously today, or I guess it starts back at minicamp, but really now begins this stretch where, hey, there's not going to be any more breaks from football. It's all football now through February. So I love that Sean Payton is standing out for all the right reasons, having up-tempo practices. We heard owner CEO Greg Penner talk about how much his teaching, like you mentioned, has really stood out. It's exciting to get to hear from him. It's exciting to know that football's back, and it sounds like everybody is united. I mean, we've talked about united in orange in years past, right? But really the team seems to understand, and this other buzzword that gets thrown around, vision, clear vision. The team seems to understand that, and they all seem to be buying in.
That's the most important thing, is getting the buy-in, right? And I think a lot of these players, they're so locked into the process here. It seems very seamless. Now, I had a chance to ask Sean Payton, because I think one of the things that, earlier this week, we had recorded our Broncos defensive line training camp preview, and we recorded that literally probably was 5 or 6 hours before the Eyioma Uwazurike news happened. And so it didn't make sense at the time. So for those who are now trying to figure out a little bit of an update, I asked Sean Payton really to start off the press conference on Wednesday with the unfortunate news of that happening, with Uwazurike being indefinitely suspended by the NFL. Are they looking at other players outside to maybe bring in? Or are they going to proceed forward with their own group of guys? And, he said, we're always looking. He says, I think all camp long, we're always looking. He said, yesterday we worked out wide receivers, but they always have their eye on things. But he said, right now we're proceeding forward in training camp with the players that we have at defensive line. So it kind of sets the table a little bit further here for a young defensive lineman who we talked about in our preview to maybe step up to the plate a little bit. And it will be interesting to see if they do make a move, because obviously some other corresponding moves that happened over the week. The Uwazurike went on the exemption list for the NFL commissioner. That frees up a roster spot. Doesn't necessarily count against Denver's 90-man roster. They released Jarrett Guarantano, and to help solidify that, the Brett Maher signing became official. And on top of that, they also added Nick Williams to the mix, the CSU Pueblo undrafted rookie free agent wide receiver. So some personnel, some business moves here as well for Denver here, Sarah. But on top of that, we also highlighted this week the NFI list, the PUP list. The PUP list obviously is going to contain Baron Browning and Kendall Hinton with their injuries respectively. The NFI includes Mike Purcell, defensive lineman, and wide receiver KJ Hamler. At practice, we saw Baron Browning, we saw Mike Purcell, we saw Kendall Hinton. They weren't in a helmet, but they had their jersey on, they had pants, and obviously they were working on the side field. Did not see KJ Hamler in this instance. We'll probably find out a little bit more on Thursday from Sean Payton. But it was worth also noting that Alex Forsythe and rookie wide receiver Marvin Mims also got some time over on the side field as well. And Sean Payton said Mims dealing with a hamstring injury, not the one that he dealt with at initially rookie minicamp or mandatory minicamp, but this is from a recent workout. So your initial thoughts on these developments here as they've come forth?
Well, Cody, I hear hamstring injury for a speedy wide receiver, and I just about throw up. Just like everybody else in Broncos country, it's kind of the fear that you have with what's gone on with KJ Hamler since he was at Penn State, right? So that certainly inflicts a little bit of fear, especially for those who are expecting Marvin Mims to play a huge role in the offense this year. Could end up being, ironically, KJ Hamler's into the offensive game plan more frequently, right? So it all kind of, it's, you just don't want any of these injury news, but at the same time, we've seen some way worse injury updates coming out of other teams' training camps already. And it's refreshing that the Broncos they've got guys working on the side field, right? You'll take that on a day-to-day in terms of training camp injury updates. But something that I really wanted to highlight and emphasize right here, all throughout the offseason, any of these players by other NFL teams that have been suspended for gambling specifically on NFL games. Other players have been suspended for gambling on other sports, right? Like Jamison Williams of the Detroit Lions. He was only suspended 6 games for that. Obviously, the Lions didn't cut him. Every player who's been suspended by the NFL for a full season or indefinitely, as they're saying, they've been cut by their respective teams. Not Eyioma Uwazurike. I find that very, very interesting. Sean Payton, he's taken a pretty dramatic stance against what the NFL is doing to these guys. So really, to me, it shows that the personal side of this has to be factored into the equation. And it's interesting that Dan Campbell, a disciple of Sean Payton's, made the decision to cut 2 guys. I know Quintez Cephas was one of them. They cut 2 guys, I think, who were suspended for indefinitely by the NFL. And he's a disciple of Sean Payton. Obviously, very, very different in terms of the way that they approached this. I don't know. What was your impression of that? I mean, it's kind of, I assumed he was going to get cut right away. The Broncos are going to be like, you know what? We have a 0 tolerance for that. But Sean Payton seems to have taken kind of the opposite approach where he's like, I hate the NFL. Basically, I hate the NFL's policy against it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Peyton on it. I think there's some hypocrisy in a sense that comes from these sports books that benefit, and they make teams make a lot of money from their partnerships with it. Obviously, we all know the integrity of the game is so important. Greg Penner talked about that. We'll dive a little bit deeper on that as well. But the integrity of the game is so important. Uwazurike did something he wasn't supposed to do, right? He's a young guy. And Sean Payton is of the sense that we want to provide this guy with support. We also want to, in a sense, wrap around, be able to reach out to him. Under these current rules that the NFL has implemented, they can't have any contact with him, not even to check up on him. And that's what really pisses off Sean Payton. It would make me mad because it's a young guy. He's isolated away from everybody else now. He's got some teammates that are going to reach out and that are going to try to, obviously keep him in good spirits. This is a learning lesson. And I like the approach. Rather than just cutting him, they obviously see something in him and they want to help him along the way, though it is going to impact him late into next offseason. So that is going to be a little bit of a hard point to overcome for him at this point of his career. And, especially being young and inexperienced, we'll see how it plays out for the Broncos. But Broncos country, we heard from Greg Penner. We heard from Damani Leech. New uniforms are in the mix here. But overall for the Broncos, as Greg Penner gets ready for his first start of training camp as the Broncos team CEO at this point, there are a lot of things that he wants to look at, and the expectations for him are very high. We're going to dive deep into that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And we're taking a look at Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb. Running backs matter in the NFL. We believe that. If you're looking to make a smooth turn in fantasy football snake drafts with the last pick in the first round and the first pick in the second round, you'll be guaranteed to have a winning 1-2 punch of workhorse power in your backfield when taking the coach Jonathan Taylor and the Browns running back Nick Chubb back to back. While Taylor is a perfect rebound candidate and a more run-friendly overall offense in Indianapolis, Chubb is also set up to dominate with more of the combined workload in Cleveland. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, tail lights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions apply.
Well, for the first time in Denver Broncos history, the team is going to wear a white helmet, Cody. And does that mean that new uniforms completely are on the way? I think fans have a lot of questions about this. It was great to get to hear from team president Damani Leech specifically about some of these big developments that are going on, I guess you could say off the field, but also we're going to see that plenty of evidence on the field and around the field at the stadium with some of the stuff that he said, as well as owner Greg Penner. But before we dive into that from Cody and I, just want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, wherever and however you listen to podcasts, free and available all over the place, as well as on YouTube. You can watch us on YouTube, listen to the show, get us however, whether you're on your commute to work, whether you're walking or jogging on the treadmill, riding the stationary bike. I know Cody has a Peloton. I've got a treadmill. We get that, just that mindless cardio, and you get some Locked On Broncos at the same time. So thank you all. Mile high salute to every single one of you who listens to us every day. And for all the everydayers out there, what are your thoughts on the white helmet? Cody, I've got to get one for my display behind me at some point, but look, it's a controversial subject. Anytime you're talking about uniforms, helmets, the appearance of the team matters to a lot of people, myself included. I had some pretty scathing reviews, but we also have to lay out some of the rules here, right? So explain to the folks what you saw today in person at Broncos HQ, this brand new white helmet for the team.
Now, for those of you that want to see maybe a little up-close video, in-person view, I posted on my Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. But, I mean, it pops. And the light, I tell you what, Sayre, I just imagine the lights at Empower Field at Mile High. Let's say if it's an evening game or a mid-afternoon where the lights are going to come on toward the third quarter. To me, looking at that, I'm like, God, that's going to pop really nice, even, regardless of what, people think of the uniform color thing. But obviously, like the rules, you mentioned it, Sayre. The rules are very extensive in the NFL because of merchandising and things like that. They have to have a very in-depth approval process. Obviously, with the NFL's collaboration with Nike, everything has to be up to par. Now, it's easier for the University of Oregon, I would say, to partner up with Nike and what they have to have all the different uniform combinations that you can think of. But overall, I think that it's a 2 to 3 year process, right? And I think a lot of people are saying, how come the Broncos didn't get a jump on this last year? Ownership wasn't in place in March or right before the NFL draft, where usually most teams send in their proposals. And I think that's maybe something that has changed. But Damani Leech had said today, obviously the team president said something along the lines here that there is something in the works. He doesn't know what the timeline exactly is right now in terms of when it'll be approved, when the Broncos will actually have new uniforms. And like I said, folks, it could be 1 to 3 years from now by the time Denver has a new set. But they're listening. And that's one thing I would say I really appreciate about Damani Leech. And I would even say Greg Penner here, Sayre. These guys seem to pay attention to what fans want. The fan experience is very important to them. And everything that they're doing, and Greg Penner even summarized that when he met with us on Wednesday inside the media workroom, everything that they do, they want to get back to where the Broncos have been known historically, right? Being a winning franchise. And Greg Penner even said it as well. Legacy and history are important to him, but he wants to honor that. But he also wants to be willing to change when necessary if it means that the Broncos are going to be better. To me, I think Broncos fans should find relief in that because you have an ownership group and you have management and you have a head coach that really values the fans' perspective in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, and what he said really stood out to me that look, you can't honor the past and do all those things at the expense of, maybe making necessary changes going forward. And I like that. You honor what was done and the traditions and all of these different things. Like there's a lot of people that love the nostalgia, absence makes the heart grow fonder sort of thing, because that's kind of where I think a lot of fans are coming from with this. They want to see those throwback uniforms. And I know for a fact that Damani Leech is seeing those types of things. You see him interacting on Twitter with a lot of fans. So that's really cool of him to do that. And I do love that as well. And it's a timing issue. Look, I was as frustrated as anybody seeing these white helmets on top of the all orange color rush, thinking to myself, well, if you can get a white helmet approved, why can't you get a white color rush uniform approved? Well, it does take a full year. Like you said, you have to submit that in March. Obviously, Damani Leech wasn't even hired by the team until August of last year. So he said within these last 11 months, right, it's almost felt like 11 years at times because of all that's going on. But new ownership group, you're adding in at least something really cool, something the franchise has never done with a white helmet coming into the mix. And I think the players are going to like it. Like Justin Simmons talked about, you've had the color rush in the mix since he was a rookie, right? That's when they debuted the color rush uniforms. So you've had the color rush uniforms, and yeah, that's cool, but you want to add that something new. And I think you can do that almost every year now if you go through the right and the proper channels. So we'll see what happens next year for the Broncos. But for now, a little taste and something brand new for the fans to enjoy. And I love the helmet, Cody. I'm sure you love it as well. Like you said, it pops, but I think it's great. And I think it's a great change up for this year. Even if it's just something small like a helmet, it gives you an indication that this team, like you said, is really listening to the fans.
And that's the important thing too. And if the Broncos can get back to winning, that'll change a lot of things, I think, in the perception of the fan base, because a lot of the fan base is still skeptical, and rightfully so. I mean, there's been a lot of hype surrounding the team the last several years. It hasn't met the expectations, but Greg Penner had also talked about his expectations for this football team. And for him, he said he's still learning a lot of things. Sean Payton has helped him learn a lot of the football side of things. He delegates to Sean on a lot of the football-related decisions and collaborates with him, when need be. He says that Payton has a lot of free reign there. But I think one of the things that stands out to me is he said the expectation here for 2023 is that the on-field product is better, and it's something that fans can be proud of. For him, we've heard him talk about he's an impatient in a sense, not an impatient in a bad way where this isn't working, I'm going to scrap it right away. It's, I want this to happen. What can we do to either accelerate it if it is a timely process? And it's going to take time. And I think that Denver's got a lot of pieces around them, Sayre. We've obviously talked about it throughout the offseason. Can they piece it all together? Can Sean Payton get the best out of all these different pieces around him, including Russell Wilson, his coaches as well? That's also an important experiment that needs to be talked about, and we'll obviously highlight that here on the show. But the expectations for Greg Penner are a much more improved product on the field, and new stadium renovations, a new massive scoreboard, video board, which looks fantastic, by the way, and some other things that fans will be able to see hopefully by the time the preseason game against the Rams happens. That's why they have a preseason game at home last versus in the beginning, so that they can get some of these final renovations from the $100 million grant that they got finalized and completed. But Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts on the uniform potential here in the next 1 to 3 years. Let us know your thoughts on what Greg Penner, Damani Leech had to say as well. But we heard from Courtland Sutton and Justin Simmons as they prepare as veterans, as captains of the team for training camp. For Justin Simmons, his 8th, the different perspectives and some touches on DeMarcus Ware as he prepares for his Hall of Fame legacy, which is coming up at the ceremony in just a couple weeks. We'll dive deep into that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, You make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Well, for your second listen of the day every single day, make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, the local experts on the biggest stories. Training camp has kicked off officially for a majority of the teams around the NFL. What are the biggest storylines coming out of the Miami Dolphins? You have Tua tattooed Tonga Vailoa now in the mix here for the Miami Dolphins. How are things going there? Make sure you check out the Locked On NFL podcast for more. As the Broncos captains prepare for training camp and building camaraderie in the locker room, one thing that they always touch on, brotherhood and understanding the bigger picture outside of just football. Courtland Sutton, Justin Simmons, these guys, they understand that. And can that help the Broncos get to where they need to be this upcoming season? Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get us on YouTube if you want to watch us, or you can get us for free wherever you get your podcasts in audio format. Aside from that, Sayre, I think the ramp up for training camp, the anticipation, I think for fans, for us as media, like I was just generally excited to wake up. I'm like, hey, I get to go to practice today. I get to put on sunscreen and avoid the blistering sun, but I get to watch football. I get to analyze. I get to see some of the things going on. Players feel the same exact way when they report for training camp because it's different. It's not like, hey, we're going to training camp. We're coming home every single night. Like they're locked away in a team structure at a team hotel. And they're trying to figure out, we're going to be in a grueling schedule this year. These 17 games that you're going to have, 18 weeks altogether, hopefully more for the Broncos this upcoming season. And the one thing that they're thinking about is we're going to need everybody in order to do it. And that goes to the team building side of things. And obviously for Courtland Sutton and Justin Simmons, these guys are two leaders who really invest in a lot of that.
They are, Cody. And speaking of leadership, I got to ask you, I didn't put this in the notes, but obviously the last year we had that bird that was out there the first one on the field at practice every day before Caden Davis, who, congrats to him. I think he just signed with the Arizona Cardinals as well. So who's our new first is it still the bird out there? Who would come out the locker room first this year at training camp, setting that example?
Well, I would say it's a little different from how we're going to be able to cover it media-wise, whereas we're on the berm, we're up above a little bit. We don't get to see who's the first out because when we come out, they're going through walkthrough. So I would have to guess that Flip, the equipment manager, he's been around for a very, very long time. I think he's the first guy on the field every single day.
That's a good one. Well, we know Courtland Sutton and Justin Simmons are setting the example, and I loved getting to hear from them. I think those are two really big leaders on the field and off the field, right? You hear from those guys, you hear them talk, you see the way that they approach being a teammate on the field. That's what I love the most about these two guys, by the way, especially Courtland Sutton. Every time you watch any highlights from the last few years, I know the Broncos don't score a lot, but you watch any highlights of somebody else scoring, and I guarantee you number 14 is going to be the first guy running up to that player. So loves getting to hear him talk just about Russell Wilson specifically. He's been working out with Russ. If you didn't see, they did some working out together with Deion Sanders out there at the CU Stadium as well. So Courtland Sutton was there working with Russ, and what he said is that Russ has a chip on his shoulder, because obviously he didn't put out what he wanted to put out last year. And I think what he said is really important about having Sean Payton in the building. He said that everyone understands the expectations that Payton is heaping upon them, which is a big thing for this team, right? Because this team has done a lot of losing, Cody. So for a guy like Sean Payton to come in, having won a Super Bowl, we know, and we saw the transition from that Super Bowl 50 team where a lot of those guys on that defense almost seemed to hold it against the offense as that offense was being rebuilt and kind of having to grow from scratch. It seemed like the defense kind of held it against them, but Sean Payton is putting expectations on these guys, having won a Super Bowl in the past, that they understand the expect. It's not just like, hey, wow, he's this big celebrity in the locker room now, and he's got a Super Bowl ring as a head coach, and like it's not like that. He's putting expectations on them that they're understanding and buying into.
One thing I had a chance to ask Justin Simmons about on Wednesday was really about building camaraderie, right? Because training camp is so different than OTAs and mini camp. You are locked in, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, with your teammates. And outside of just being on the football field, asking the question is, how do you build brotherhood? How do you build camaraderie? Because those things I know are very important to Justin. His teammates go to all his events, whether it's in Florida, whether it's here in Colorado. That is huge in terms of that. It just goes to show where that vibe is. And he said, hey, because ironically enough, talking about DeMarcus, where he's going to be getting his jacket, he's going to be getting his bust in Canton here in just a few weeks' time. we're excited about that. It said, as a rookie, DeMarcus would come over to my table at, the cafeteria lunch, and we'd talk about, football. We talk about where I went to college, because obviously D Ware went to Troy. Justin Simmons went to Boston College. So there was some friendly banter, but it was more so just getting to know these guys out away from football, where the conversations have nothing to do with football itself. And when you know people and you get to know people, you know who they are, and you kind of get a sense in maybe their journey and their story coming. We all have one, but it helps you understand, hey, when I'm in a tough position on the football field, I need to know my teammates. I need to know that they trust me, and they need to know that I trust them. That's the important part about it. And look, we talk about football. We talk about highlights all the time. These are the things, Sayre, that really matter at the end of the day, that separates really good teams from really bad teams. Teams that don't have that type of chemistry and camaraderie can't survive some of the things that I'd say that the Broncos have gone through. Denver has had that, though. And even though things have been bad the last couple of years, Sayre, I think that's one big reason they have held on, and it hasn't been worse than I think it could have been.
And I think that's why you've seen this team put up a lot better fight than I think a lot of national media would like to give them credit for. I mean, the Broncos were in 10 one-score games last season, and obviously they lost 8 of those. And it speaks to this team not giving up on each other. That was something that I think, you heard that from Nathaniel Hackett all throughout last season, and it sounds like a cliche, but you really have to grind through that mentally when you're going through a time of just, man, whether it's a dry spell in your work situation, or whether it's, tough times with your family or things like that, man, is you gotta have those people around you that can build you up, and that, man, you can go to them for something besides just work, just like football talk. Right. And so that's what I think Justin Simmons is talking about, is building that camaraderie and having intentional conversations. I love what he said too. It was very, very appropriate wording. He said it's investments in relationships, right? That's exactly what it is. And it's not, not to try to make it too deep, but really football has to be that way. These guys are going to build and forge a bond that, like you said, it's a grind for the next few months here. So it's so important for these guys to build that up. And I love that Simmons is exemplifying and leading the charge in that way, because he's going to pass that torch to somebody else.
100%. And look, Russell Wilson is doing the same exact thing. And I kind of like that the attention really this offseason, Sayre, it hasn't really been on Russell Wilson, which is good. I mean, I think by design, the way the Broncos have created it is we talked to Russ once during OTAs and minicamp, and we have yet to talk. I imagine we'll talk to him at some point this week. But the focus hasn't really been on him. It's been about the process. It's been about the overarching thing of the team, which I think is great, because you have unnecessary hype. It puts a lot of pressure on players. Russell Wilson just can just go out there and ball, which is something that Courtland Sutton, as you mentioned too, that's what he's doing. That's what he's focused on. And I can tell you this, I can't give away too much about what happened, what I saw in practice, but with Russ, I'm still seeing what I'm seeing in OTAs and minicamp. I'm seeing a more decisive Russ, getting the ball out of his hands, knowing where he's going. And that's something that Sean Payton really talked about. He kind of highlighted it with Ben DiNucci about what they really like about Ben, but it also applies to Russell Wilson. Knowing the play, getting in and out of the huddle, knowing where you're going with the football, knowing what receiver or back you're going to. Those are the things, and these quarterbacks all embody that. And, hey, it's going to be a big training camp here for Russell Wilson as he looks to turn things around this season. I think he's got the support pieces around him. He's got the coaching around him as well. It is a work in progress. It's not going to look pretty. It's not going to take just one practice or two practices. It's going to be a grind and collective effort leading up to that first regular season game and through the regular season. And one thing is for certain, hey, we're excited because we get to be here every step of the way with all you avid listeners in Broncos country. But with that said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here. Thank you so much, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe or follow so you never miss out on any Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. I'll be at practice every day. I'll be at games. Sayre and I will break down all the biggest storylines and tell you why it matters, why it's important. You're going to get that here on Locked On Broncos. Tomorrow's episode of the show, you can expect more training camp recap. And then Fridays, guess what? Everything's picking up. Every time that there's a practice, even on the weekends, you can get a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. We can't wait. We're excited for the ride. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.